North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. We bring you the news. That's right. We report the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That is not the news. That is simply my opinion, and it's just as valuable as yours. So by all means, share yours. I'll share mine. We'll discuss, compare notes, etc., and that's debate. What do you get with the Wells Report? News, analysis, commentary, and debate. If you'd like to take part in that debate, here's the telephone number, 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. I just realized something. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I don't know whether you've been around this or not, but the way we've been producing this broadcast is we've been doing this 3 hours at a time. In other words, this show has been 3 hours. Okay. And let's see, hang on just a second here. Hour number 1 for September. Okay. All right. So anyway, what I've been doing is I've been working my way through doing essentially a 3-hour broadcast. And the 3-hour broadcast is nice, except for one thing. It means that I throw a whole bunch at you. I mean, I throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. And I thought what I would do is I'd split up the broadcast into 3 separate hours. So you could look at the description that I'm going to put on Patreon, by the way. Go to www.patreon.com/The Wells Report, and you'll be able to see hour number 1 and what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about President Biden. We're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the media meltdown over President Biden. I'll explain in just a couple of minutes. And a couple of other things. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to redo the broadcast for the second hour. Now, that's going to mean that if you tune in to the Wells Report while we're doing it live, which is between 2 and 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, from 2 and 5 p.m., Monday through Friday in the Central Time Zone, right? You're going to have to re-sign in. And I'm hoping that that's not going to be annoying to you. I talked about it with a bunch of Wells Report listeners. The Wells Reporters got together over the weekend at Flip's Patio Grill in Grapevine, Texas. It was a lot of fun. We had a bunch of fun. And I asked whether or not this would drive people crazy if they have to keep signing in every hour for the Wells Report. And so I thought what I would do is I'd give it a try, and you can tell me whether or not it sucks. And if it does suck, we'll think of something else. But I figured that what I would do, instead of throwing a 3-hour broadcast up there, which is unwieldy, I thought what I would do is put it in 3 separate chunks every day, and let's see if it works. What do you think? Okay, by the way, if you have a comment on that, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172, or you can join us in the chat room. By the way, Lois Floyd wins the chat room derby today. She's the first through, and I want to say thanks very much to Ms. Lois for joining us. All right, so President Biden was on 60 Minutes yesterday, and Scott Pelley ran him through what was a decidedly well-edited interview, and the president brought up something that was kind of startling. Scott Pelley asked him about COVID-19 and about the pandemic. And President Biden said, hey, the COVID-19 pandemic is over. This upset a lot of apple carts around the country, and I will explain coming up a little bit later on this hour. So President Biden on 60 Minutes last night said, we still have a problem with COVID. We're doing a lot of work on it, but the pandemic is over. He went on to say no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And at a press briefing last week, the head of the World Health Organization said the pandemic could be at a turning point. We're not there yet, but the end is in sight, said WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, or whatever the hell you say his name. I'm sorry. I should probably be better than that. Anyway, so the president said the pandemic is over. Okay, and people melted down. They melted down on MSNBC. There are a whole bunch of critics that are melting down. We'll get to that in the second hour. Not the second hour, but the second half hour of this broadcast. This, by the way, as I said, will be hour number one. There will be two other podcasts available to you on Patreon. And, oh, by the way, YouTube. So we'll be able to do this 1 hour at a time. Notice I changed my little thing here. The Wells Report, hour number one for September 19th, 2022. There. Okay. So he went on to talk about a bunch of other things. He said in that interview that aired last night on CBS that he had not been briefed on classified documents federal agents retrieved last month from former President Donald Trump's Florida estate. He said on 60 Minutes he hasn't asked for the specifics of those documents because he doesn't want to get involved in Justice Department investigations. I agreed I would not tell them what to do and not, in fact, engage in telling them how to prosecute or not. How nice. He previously said he had zero advance notice before the FBI searched President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Agents seized 11,000 documents, including 54 marked secret and 18 marked top secret. That squares, by the way. I don't know exactly what they're talking about with 18 because I counted 11 top secret when they went through all of those things. So there's a little disparity in the numbers that I did because I went through that too. I had 11. They have 18. Okay, that's fine. President Biden said he had not spoken personally to anyone about national security secrets that might be in the documents, but then he added, I'm sure my administration is aware of all that, and so is the National Security Council. It's probably true. Biden said he also wondered how sensitive documents could have ended up at Mar-a-Lago, calling it totally irresponsible. Well, you don't have to go any further than the GAO, the General Accounting Office, because they were the people that packed up all the boxes and sent them to Mar-a-Lago in the first place. That's according to news reports from one end of the country to the other. He was also asked about re-election. Biden said it's much too early to decide if he's going to run for re-election in 2024. Look, my intention, as I said to begin with, is that I would run again, but that's just an intention. Is it a firm decision that I run again? That remains to be seen. That is him backing off of an unequivocal statement that he was going to run again. And that, of course, sent shockwaves through the political world, some of which may indeed reach out and touch you. Yeah. I'll explain coming up in just a couple of moments. Let's suffice it to say that someone immediately declared themselves the heir apparent. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. President Biden also talked a little bit about defending Taiwan. President Biden said the U.S. military forces would defend Taiwan if it's attacked by China. After President Biden made a similar comment during a trip to Asia in May, he nonetheless said the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity toward Taiwan has not changed. Similarly, CBS said a White House official likewise stressed after the interview, U.S. policy has not changed. Well, if the president has changed the policy, then it most assuredly has changed. So what's going on with that? I really don't know. But if we're talking about strategic ambiguity, then by all means, there's certainly strategic ambiguity now. China has no idea what the United States is going to do, and I guess that's the point. The question is, does Taiwan know what the United States will do? As a matter of fact, I'd kind of like to know what the United States would do if Taiwan was attacked by China. But the president has made it clear that the United States military would intervene if China attacked Taiwan. Is that one of those Obama-Biden red lines that we had, like with Syria? I don't know. I certainly hope it isn't. I hope that what we do is we defend that particular island, because that would make it abundantly clear to anyone in the world that, yes, the United States is most assuredly going to defend countries that are being threatened by giant communist totalitarian superpowers. And I find that to be actually soothing in some way, because I'm really concerned that this guy's going to bail out on Taiwan. I really am. And there was something else I was thinking about all this stuff. I was thinking about all of this, and I was listening to the president talk about how he didn't have any idea what was going on with the Mar-a-Lago raid, et cetera, et cetera. And I said to myself, I said, gosh, I wish I could believe him. That was just one of those unconscious things you say. Gosh, I wish I could believe him. Do you do that? When the president speaks, or when Kamala Harris speaks, or when Chuck Schumer speaks, or when Nancy Pelosi speaks, do you sit there and say they're lying to me? I mean, that's something that I really would like to discuss. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Without casting aspersions on any of these people, without casting aspersions on a single one of them, do you believe anything that Democrat Party leaders say? Do you believe that they are being straightforward? Do you believe that they're being straightforward and honest? Do you believe what they say? Yes or no, and why? 817-379-2172. Because I was sitting there listening to President Biden, I'm going, man, I really wish I wish I knew what he was saying. Not because I want to believe what he's saying, but I just wish it was somehow truthful. I wish I didn't immediately go to the default position that there's something ulterior behind it, or that there's somebody going to show up behind the president and clean up the mess. Like, I haven't heard any mess cleaning or spin on the pandemic conversation, but there are a lot of people that are angry about it. There are a whole bunch of critics that are very angry about that statement. We're going to get to that in the second half hour of this podcast. This is hour number 1 of 3. So when they talk like that, I just wonder. So let's go to the chat room, okay, and listen to what people are saying. Okay, the reason. Oh, Yvonne says, "Hey, look, I got the first hour posted, but I couldn't find the Patreon description for first hour yet. That's because I have to wait until the hour's over before I can post it, Ms. Yvonne. Okay, so there you go. Whatever platform we're watching on. Yes, there will be three separate podcasts, okay? Stop making people take the jab. Oh, that's a response from Mike Renwee regarding the president saying that the pandemic is over. Absolutely do that. That's one of the problems that they have. The other problem is remember that loan payout for college kids that can't pay their school loans? Yeah, that was done under the auspice of emergency orders having to do with COVID. So let me ask this question. So if the pandemic's over, is the emergency over? And if the emergency is over, does that mean that the college loan payoff situation, is that over too? By the way, in case you're wondering, I ran across a report that President Biden's executive orders have now added up to $1.5 trillion in spending. I'll be asking about that later on in the broadcast as we continue with the news, with the analysis for fact and bias, with commentary and debate. This is the Wells Report. Good to have you back for another work week. Back with more in just a moment. You stay right where you are. This is the first of 3 podcasts for the 19th day of September, year of our Lord 2022. I am John David Wells. Welcome to the Wells Report. Like I said, the first hour, we'll have 2 more coming up a little bit later on. We're covering the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out each. We make commentary and debate. Telephone number 817-379-2172. I asked a moment ago, when Democrat leadership is standing in front of a camera somewhere and speaking, do you believe what they say? What is your default setting when you hear them speaking? Do you believe them? Let's see. First of all, somebody said that Vice President Harris doesn't speak. She cackles. Okay. Someone else says, I auto start by assuming a lie. Wow. Another says, I don't believe anything they say. They've been caught lying over and over and over again. And then one more person says, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Yeah, that's a good one. Regarding whether or not the president knew anything about Mar-a-Lago, someone said, I don't think President Biden knows anything about Mar-a-Lago. They're afraid that he'd spill the beans. And that is something that could indeed be true. So let's talk a little bit about something that I brought up right before the break, and that is that the president has spent an awful lot of money with his executive orders. President Biden has issued nearly 100 executive orders, actually 99. Those executive orders, or EOs, will cost taxpayers up to $1.5 trillion. This, as the national debt hovers somewhere around $30.8 trillion. President Biden currently sits at 99 executive orders since taking office. His torrid pace came primarily within his first year when he issued more than any president since the 1970s. By the way, this is Fox News coverage, therefore biased. So keep that in mind, okay? Memos show, by the way, that at least one outside left-wing group financed by millions from liberal billionaire George Soros did indeed influence some of President Biden's orders and regulatory terms or regulatory items. You know, isn't that influence peddling? How does that work out? I don't understand. A budgetary impact analysis accompanies each order but does not include actual monetary costs. Instead, they contain vague language such as whether an order will have no impact, increase, or decrease federal costs. That makes it difficult to postpone or pinpoint, rather, the actual price of any particular executive order that President Biden issues. However, a federal budget expert, don't know who this person is, according to Fox News, estimates the cost to be north of $1 trillion. Now, that does make sense because the buyback of student college debt is, depending on who you talk to, anywhere between $500 billion to $1 trillion, just that alone. So the Heritage Foundation's Matthew Dickerson told Fox News in an interview that President Biden's executive actions have cost taxpayers more than $1 trillion so far. That's taking into account the recent student loan executive action, which could cost up to $1 trillion by itself. But earlier this year, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office produced an analysis showing that less than 10 of President Biden's earlier executive actions cost taxpayers already more than $500 billion. You know, I didn't realize that the president could spend that much money. I mean, that's essentially nearly $1 trillion just based on presidential fiat. I'm sorry, when they were talking about the executive orders of President Trump, didn't they call him a dictator? I mean, I'm not exactly sure of the monetary costs of President Trump's executive orders. I imagine that there was quite a cost because that was during the beginning of COVID-19, a pandemic that President Biden now says is over. And there are a lot of people mighty steamed about that. We'll continue with a look at the 60 Minutes interview the president had in just a couple of moments. This is hour number 1 of the Wells Report. Stick around. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments on this Monday. Thanks for being here. This is the Wells Report. We bring you news. We report the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We make commentary, not the news. And we debate the news, the analysis, the bias, everything. And especially my commentary. If you have anything you'd like to say, join us at 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. The president was on 60 Minutes last night. He declared that the COVID pandemic was over. Excuse me? This is problematic for the president. I'll explain in just a couple of moments. One of my one of the people that spends a lot of time on our chat room has a very, shall we say, singeing wit, and says, "Don't worry, COVID will be back just in time for the election," which, by the way, is 50 days away, 50 days away. She says it'll be back because they've got to justify mail-in voting, which I thought was funny. It was very, very good. So like I was saying, the president did indeed ruffle feathers on both sides of the political aisle, according to Fox News. President Biden claimed the COVID-19 pandemic is over during an interview with 60 Minutes, CBS 60 Minutes on Sunday, sparking intense backlash from both conservatives and liberal voices across the social media spectrum, who called out his administration's recent mixed messaging. The president said the pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We still have a lot of work to do, but the pandemic is over. The president's word triggered criticism over his COVID-19 emergency power usage, mask wearing, ongoing mask and vaccine mandates across the U.S. Conservatives slammed his alleged overarching power, and leftists criticized his irresponsible claim. Apparently, the leftists are not especially happy with the fact that the president apparently canceled all their power. And conservatives aren't especially happy because he's basing an awful lot of very odd spending you can't do because the Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. There's all kinds of constitutional issues there. So conservatives are upset, and they're upset about his power overreach. And leftists are criticizing the irresponsible claim. Left-wingers are going to be furious at him for this, but this is also interesting because less than a month ago, he justified canceling $1 trillion in student loans by citing his COVID emergency powers. This from Clay Travis, who works with Outkick. Representative Thomas Massey, he's a Republican from Kentucky, offered a similar critique. He said if the pandemic is over, as President Biden says, then all the president's emergency powers predicated on a pandemic, all COVID-19 vax mandates, emergency powers of every governor, emergency use authorizations, and the PrEP Act should be voided tomorrow. And I agree with that 100%, especially the emergency use certifications from the FDA regarding the COVID-19 vaccines and boosters. Now, all those people that lost their jobs or are on the brink of losing their jobs, no longer on the brink of losing their jobs, the president has spoken. Okay? President Biden also garnered criticism for choosing to mask up in recent weeks, a move contradicting his claim. Conservative radio host Buck Sexton, a colleague of mine, tweeted screenshots of a Daily Mail article featuring a masked Biden, tacking on the critique that he wore masked outdoors as recent as 2 weeks ago. Your reminder, the President Biden was wearing masks outside 2 weeks ago, but is now saying the pandemic is over because the election is coming up and he's completely full of crap. That's what Buck Sexton says. He said, okay, I just give you the news. Do I think the president is full of crap? I'll answer that in a minute. National Review senior writer Charles C.W. Cook reflected on President Biden's calls to end the Title 42 legislation earlier this year, saying his declaration, quote, confirms the illegality of his attempt to transfer hundreds of billions of dollars of student loan debt to the taxpayers, unquote. Other conservative critics ask why emergency orders are still in effect in several U.S. states. Children are being masked in public schools. Unvaccinated children are prohibited from playing sports in certain areas. If the pandemic is over, all that's gone now. It's absolutely gone. Left-leaning critics, frustrated by President Biden's alleged attempt to gloss over the dangers of COVID-19, tweeted outrage as well. Dr. Lucky Tran, a science communicator affiliated with Columbia University, wrote, after complaining for 2 years that it's the pandemic of the unvaccinated, the president did maybe the single worst thing anybody could do to lower vaccination rates, prematurely declaring the pandemic is over. If the president declares it, it's not premature, is it? Tran, in a separate tweet, countered Biden's claim with data from Johns Hopkins University showcasing an incline in COVID-19 deaths over the last 12 months. See, they got to be really careful with this. Remember how harsh they were with President Trump and the death rate of COVID-19 during the Trump administration? It's worse under President Biden. They need to be very careful about this. Talk about screwing up their messaging. You know, this is like one of those accidents on the freeways. You know, everybody's traveling along 60, 70 miles an hour. Everybody's traveling along. Everything's fine, blah, 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 blah. And somebody an eighth of a mile away makes a mistake. There's a crash. And then people behind them crash and people behind them crash and so on and so forth. You get one of these chain reaction things. That's what's happening here. The president blows off the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, vaccine mandates, gone. Mask mandates, gone. The forgiveness of student loans, gone. All of this legislation because of emergency powers because of COVID-19, gone. All this stuff is gone. Then, of course, there's MSNBC. This is funny. I mean, it is and it isn't. Mehdi Hasan, the host of MSNBC's The Mehdi Hasan Show, reacted to a clip of President Biden saying during an interview with CBS Scott Pelley that COVID-19 pandemic is over. One of the many reasons they're not wearing masks is because people like Biden keep falsely telling them the pandemic is over, said Hasan in a response to the 60 Minutes interview. Scott Pelley, who was doing the interview, asked the president if the COVID-19 pandemic was over while he was walking through the Detroit Auto Show. And you know what he said, the pandemic is over, we still have a problem with COVID, we still got a lot of work to do, et cetera, et cetera. Scott Pelley also asked the president if he'd be running for election, but that's something else. But like I said, Mehdi Hasan melted down. Just absolutely melted down. And so what do you get from all of this? Well, what you get is you find yourself in a position where the president, like I said, has caused this policy collision that is still denting up the administration's credibility as we speak today. I mean, what else is going to change? Mask mandates are gone, right? Vaccination mandates gone, right? I mean, these are hard and fast things. How does the president escape all this? He doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. I mean, think about this. I was out all weekend long. There was no social distancing. I think I saw one or two people wearing masks. One or two people. And they were essentially waiters at restaurants. So for all intents and purposes, the president is right. The pandemic is over. But after making this declaration, there are an awful lot of cleanup things that have to happen. And it still bugs me that, once again, all these people that are criticizing the president quote Johns Hopkins data. Why aren't they quoting CDC data? CDC data is the property of the people of the United States. Johns Hopkins data is whatever Johns Hopkins wants it to say. I'd like official information, please. But then again, the CDC does not want to be responsible for official information, does it? Why? Because it's a political organization, not a public health organization. They're playing politics like so many other executive branch agencies. And that's why I think the CDC needs to be abolished. Anyway, all of this political gobbledygook comes home to rest. It comes home to roost, rather, right this minute because of the president's loose commentary last night regarding COVID-19. And speaking of criticism And speaking of this particular interview, Scott Pelley is being criticized for treating President Biden with kid gloves during a rare interview on 60 Minutes. In the eyes of critics who argued the CBS journalist lobbed softballs or were peeved at the lack of follow-up questions. Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you're Scott Pelley? Okay, so this is one of the problems. Let me explain this. Scott Pelley is a leftist. He is on board with leftist politics. When I refer to the mainstream media as the mainstream media abandoning truth and choosing sides, Scott Pelley is the poster child for all that. So he's got a Democrat president, a leftist. Is he going to embarrass that president on the air? The answer is no. There were a lot of edits in this interview. A lot of them. Why? Well, because the president is infirm. He doesn't communicate well. He has difficulty. He wanders. His mind wanders, and his communications follow where his mind is going. I'm sorry to say his mind is going, but that's out of context. Anyway, well, actually, it's true. But let's move on. If you're Scott Pelley, are you going to ask penetrating, serious follow-up questions? I don't think so. So all these people that are saying, Scott Pelley, you should have been harsh with the president. He's not going to be harsh with the president. He's on board with the Biden administration. This is the problem. You have to understand something. The president has gone nearly 250 days without a live interview with anybody. This was edited, not a live interview. And they had days to do it. The president was at the Detroit Auto Show last week. And so this is all very carefully handled. Those people that are saying, my gosh, he just lobbed softballs. He didn't ask penetrating, hard-bitten follow-up questions. Yeah, right. Like they're going to. Is that a failure? Yes. Can you ask difficult questions of a president that you disagree with politically? Certainly. But you have to do it in a certain way. I'll get back to that in just a couple of seconds. Biden made news several times during the interview with an American journalist. This was the first one in 7 months. He admitted that it remains to be seen if he's going to run again in 2024. He said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan against an attack from China, even declaring the COVID pandemic is over. However, the conversation left many people, many viewers disappointed, some irked that Pelley didn't particularly push back on the president, and others wanted him to bring up the crisis along the southern border, which he did not do. Why? Because the president has no answer. He has no answer. It is a bucket of snakes. Because if you ask about the border, then you have to ask about the president allowing people into the United States. He's imported 1 million of these people into the United States, putting them on buses and sending them to cities all over the country in the dead of night without telling anybody where they're going. And yet we'll criticize Ron DeSantis, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey for doing the exact same thing, except they're being sent to sanctuary cities. More about that coming up here on the Wells Report. So from the very start, it was clear why President Biden chose Scott Pelley to conduct his first sit-down interview in months. Right out of the gate until the last minute, Pelley gushed and sucked up to Biden in an embarrassing fashion. This according to Newsbusters. Kevin Tober is the analyst. In reference to Pelley discussing how initially the summer was going so well for the president. Once Pelley was finished with his servile opening introduction for Biden, he began by asking the president a series of questions about the economic calamity that President Biden has caused. Except Pelley didn't frame it that way. He said he let Biden get away with his lies on the economy and the refusal to admit the United States is in a recession. Now, this is from Tober. Okay, these are not my words. The media watchdog wrote that Pelley asked Biden what he can do to prevent a recession with the premise of the question being that Biden's recession denialism is actually a reality. Biden declared, and goes back to the COVID-19 pandemic. So Scott Pelley doing his dead level best not to hand the president, what, a pothole to crash his Corvette in, is now getting slammed all over the country for essentially softballing the president. Well, all you can say is that they both earned it, which gets us back to the credibility thing I asked earlier this hour. When the president's speaking, can you believe anything he's saying? When he's being interviewed with a leftist journalist, can you believe anything they're saying? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. The news, analysis, commentary, and debates. By all means, debate. You can also join us on the chat room, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. And more to be announced very, very soon. Stick with us and stick with this broadcast. If you think this thing has value, do me a favor, share it with your friends. Also, subscribe. Hit the subscription button so that you know when this podcast is on the air. Coming up in the next hour, the hour number 2 of this broadcast today, which will be separate, so you don't have to choke down a 3-hour broadcast every day. We'll be talking about immigration and how apparently Massachusetts is trying to figure out some way of hanging a human trafficking charge on Governor DeSantis of Florida. We'll be talking about that next hour on the Wells Report in the second hour of this podcast. So speaking of governors and speaking of the president who sort of backed off on, I'm absolutely going to run for re-election in 2024. He said, I have the intention to run, but he's not running. But guess who jumped into the breach when that came out? Courtesy of The Wrap, which is a website news service. California Governor Gavin Newsom is, quote, undeniably, unequivocally, unquote, planning to run for president in 2024 if President Biden chooses not to seek a second term, according to two individuals with knowledge of Newsom's plan, speaking specifically and exclusively to The Wrap. After this midterm election is over, he is absolutely going to announce that he is running for the presidency once President Biden announces he is not running. This according to a leading California fundraiser with close ties to the Newsom family. No ifs, ands, or buts. He will run if President Biden does not. Interesting. What does that mean? That means that the pretense that the Democrat Party is the Democrat Party is over. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Gavin Newsom, along with Governor Jerry Brown, have essentially taken California down the socialist sewer hole. California is, for all intents and purposes, a socialist politician's paradise. And Gavin Newsom is at the head of the train, taking them right to the very vestiges of socialist hell. People are moving out of California as fast as they possibly can. They've lost almost 1 million citizens. Soon they're going to start losing influence in Congress. It's happened in New York. It's going to happen in California. As a matter of fact, I think they lost 2 seats. That's going to get worse and worse and worse. All these leftist enclaves are upsetting people and they're leaving. And now Gavin Newsom wants to bring that level of socialist dystopia to everybody in the United States. This guy, just watch any of his speeches. He violates the political version of the Hippocratic Oath. Okay? You know the Hippocratic Oath? First, do no harm. Well, the political version of that is first, do no smarm. This guy is a cynical, snide, smug actor, and he's terrible at it. He's just absolutely awful about it. I mean, you look at the looks on his face, and you look at these sneers when he's talking. That is not a president. That's a crazy man. Now, don't get me wrong. I always criticize people for castigating people's intellectual acumen when politics are involved. Oh, these people are insane. Except you have to understand something. Okay? I have a certain level of experience with psychopaths. Okay? I was married to one. And I know what I'm seeing. Am I a professional? No. I'm not a professional psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm just somebody that has lived with a functioning, if you can say that, psychopath. And that is exactly what Gavin Newsom is, in my opinion. Just my opinion. I've seen that before. You know, he sits out there and he says, this is the way things are, A, B, C, D, these are the rules, et cetera, and then blows them off. What he's able to do is change the rules based on his mood at the time. That's what psychopaths do. They just lie. They lie at the drop of a hat. They lie because they have to. They lie because nothing is more important than their self-image. That's also narcissism. That's what I see in this guy. Now, if you happen to be a psychologist, gosh, tell me how I'm getting this wrong. because I think I got the guy pegged. Seriously. And so this is hour number 1 of the Wells Report for the 19th day of September. We've got hour number 2 coming up right behind this. You can watch this one, and then if you like it, stick around for number 2. And then we'll have a third hour a little bit later on today. Those people that are joining us, please get ready to sign back in. We'll have the new second hour stream coming up in just a couple of moments as we get through the news, the analysis, the commentary, and debate for this 19th day of September, year of our Lord 2022. Thanks very much for joining us. This is the Wells Report. Tell your friends about us. Have a great day.